Today we are at Gori State University, one of the state universities that open child rights centers in partnership with UNICEF. We are very glad that these centers have become very active in promoting and protecting children's rights. Our topic for today is the effective implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child after being ratified by a member state. In this case, we are talking about Georgia, which ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and all other countries who have ratified as well. And what does it mean to have a meaningful implementation of the Convention after ratification? The first point to mention is the harmonization of the national laws with the Convention on the Rights of the Child, with the 4 general principles of the Convention and also with all the provisions. This means that not a single national law should be in contradiction with the provisions of the Convention. At the same time, not a single national law, not a single article of the national law should be in contradiction or against the spirit of the Convention, which is represented by the 4 general principles, which are non-discrimination in Article 2 of the Convention, the best interest of the child in Article 3, the right to life, survival and development in Article 6, and the right to participation in Article 12. These 4 general principles constitute the spirit and the main purpose of the Convention, and not a single article in the national legislation should be against this spirit of the Convention. So a country has ratified, then the country becomes a state party to the Convention, a member state of the United Nations organization, and a state party to the Convention, and the harmonization process should happen before ratification. However, in the international jurisprudence of international law, and in order to encourage states to ratify, it is possible also to continue the harmonization process of national laws with the Convention after ratification. But unfortunately, we have seen many states which ratify and they took long time, and maybe until now, they have not brought their national legislation totally in line with the Convention. And this is a breach of international law, and this is also a shortcoming in fulfilling the obligations of a state party to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. The other mechanism which is extremely important to implement meaningfully any convention of the international human rights law, but specifically for our discussion today, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, is to establish national facilities, national entities, national institutions to ensure the implementation and to monitor the implementation as well. For instance, in Georgia, there is a commission on child rights which follows the implementation, and it is under the Prime Minister's office. At the same time, there is a council for the protection of children's rights, a permanent council at the Parliament of Georgia. So the Parliament and the executive branch, having both entities to monitor the implementation of the Convention, is extremely important. At the same time, civil societies, they also have a very important role in monitoring and in implementing, besides the governments, the Convention. So without an effective monitoring system, the Convention may never be implemented, and the articles of the Convention would remain ink on paper. This is what UNICEF wants to avoid everywhere, and this is how UNICEF supports the effective implementation of the Convention through building the capacity of the national stakeholders to understand first what the Convention is and to make sure that implementation takes place. And in terms of capacity building, UNICEF promotes the professional training, in-service training, and also the academic pre-service training of professionals. That's why in Georgia, UNICEF has an excellent partnership with the academia, and 7 state universities in the regions of Georgia have established child rights centers to promote children's rights and to protect children's rights. And these centers have just started now a new agenda, which is a research agenda, preparation of thematic studies on specific problematic issues that children are facing in the society. And this will bring these universities as real defenders of child rights. I would like also to mention today the international mechanisms for the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And the main body for that is the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, which is established according to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It is explained in Articles 42 to 45 of the Convention, and it deals with the monitoring system, the international monitoring system of the Convention. And this committee meets 3 times a year in Geneva, and the 18 members, at the beginning it was 10 members, and the 18 members, they discuss the reports, the periodic reports, first the initial report, which is sent 2 years after ratification, and thereafter the periodic reports, which are sent every 5 years. They discuss these reports, and then they hold hearings with the governments and with the delegation, national delegation, which also comprise members of the civil society, experts. It's up to the government to form the delegation. But in all cases, the committee also had pre-meetings with the civil society organizations to better understand what is happening in the country for children. And also the committee receives shadow reports or alternative reports from the civil society. And also the committee is always ready to receive reports from experts, child rights experts. So with all these materials at hand, the committee reviews and conducts a hearing with the delegation, national delegation, and then comes up with concluding observations to recommend, first to welcome what has the positive things that happened, then to talk about the problematic areas and areas of concern, and they end up the concluding observations with recommendations. And UNICEF looks very carefully at these recommendations and also promotes them in the society and encourages governments to take them, to deal with them very seriously, because these recommendations are very important and they definitely contribute to a better situation for the children and for a better and more effective implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So Articles 42 to 45, they deal with all the technicalities of this committee, UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, and they mention specifically UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, as a key agency to support the process of reporting and monitoring the implementation. Now, coming back a little bit to the articles of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, I would like now to mention specific articles which are very significant to the implementation of the Convention. Let me start with Article 4, which requests every state party to exercise their efforts to the maximum available resources to implement the Convention. And this means that the state party has to prioritize children and to really make children at the top priority of their national agenda, and to prove that they exercise their efforts to the maximum available resources. And if they don't have the needed resources to fully implement the convention, then they have to explain this at national level to the bodies responsible for monitoring the convention, like, for instance, a Council for Children's Rights, the Parliament of Georgia, and also when they meet with the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child in Geneva to explain how they exercised their efforts to the maximum available resources, and still they could not implement fully a specific article or a certain area of child rights. I would like to mention also Article 41, which is a very interesting article because it stipulates that if the state party has any laws, regulations which are at a higher standard of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, then the country should apply the higher standards. And this is an opportunity also to mention again that international human rights law is about minimum standards, and the Convention on the Rights of the Child sets the minimum standards on how to deal with children and how to uphold children's rights. So this means that every state party should have higher level of standards to make sure that children develop to their fullest. Let me wrap up by mentioning that many countries globally took very good, excellent initiatives to make sure that the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child is very effective. And some countries, based on the convention and its implementation, released thousands of children from armed groups. Other countries improved the quality education. Inclusive education as well took place in many countries based on the effective implementation of the convention. In summary, I would like to mention that an effective implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child definitely brings very tangible and very positive results, changing positively the lives of children and their families. So that's why these implementation mechanisms and also creating mechanisms to monitor the implementation of the convention is extremely important. In the past, before the establishment of the treaty bodies in the UN system to monitor the implementation of international human rights conventions, before the establishment of many human rights monitoring mechanisms in the human rights in the UN system, the jurists used to say that international human rights law or international law in general is a law without teeth, because there were no mechanisms to effectively implement international human rights law. But with the treaty bodies, with other mechanisms, and also with the mechanisms created at national level, international human rights law has become much more powerful, and this is where we encourage all governments to make sure that all the mechanisms are established for a full implementation of the convention.